Oh hey, it's Wes. And I have had so many requests to try out RGB LED panels. Now, full disclosure, all these panels were sent to me by their manufacturers or distributors free of charge for my review. And obviously that's not going to gain any favor for any of them because we're gonna have a head-to-head and see how they compare. I'm not going to say I'll have one win a competition like this because everyone has different needs. I might tell you which one's my favorite at the end though, but that's personally my decision to make, just for me. So I'll try to be quick. You might need to pause, rewind if there's something you really want to know, but let's try to fly through this and see exactly what these do and which one is best for you. Starting out, what do you get with them? We'll start with the Sutefoto. It comes in this little zippy bag. It doesn't really have a box at all. You get a hot shoe mount, USB-C cable, and a manual. Then we have the Pilotfly. You have a decent box, a very robust belt pouch, almost excessively so. This kind of nifty little rotating arm bracket that goes into the bottom of the AtomCUBE and then can rotate around. It's kind of an imitation of the moving arm on the Boling P1, but we'll talk more about that in a moment. USB cable, manual, warranty information. The Iwata GL-03, a very nice looking box, a little neoprene pouch that just barely fits it, very nice, well designed, and a USB-C cable, as usual. And finally, the Boling P1, kind of the classic in this space at this point. You get the box, USB-C cable. They don't score any points for what kind of box they come in though, so first of all, build quality. We'll start with the Iwata. This one I've been using for a while. Additionally, I've been using the P1 for a while. These two, the AtomCUBE and the Sutefoto, are a bit newer to me, although I've run them through their paces and tried to wear them out if possible. So the Iwata is the friend, the partner of the classic Iwata GL-01. I've been using this guy for a long time. Really like the form factor, fit and finish, it's well designed. And so in this case, Iwata updated their design and produced, in the exact same form factor, another cute little light. This is pretty much an all-metal design, but I suspect that if I tried and sat on this, I could probably break it because they've likely sacrificed just a little bit in the case of making it very, very small. It's probably not super rugged though, but very well designed. 8 out of 10 for build quality. The Sutefoto kind of surprised me. I was expecting this to be very, very cheaply made because it's kind of generic. The brand doesn't exactly have a website, just kind of exists on Amazon. But this thing is carved out of a solid block of aluminum. And it's actually the toughest of all my lights. It is rugged and rigid and pretty surprising. I'm pretty sure even the buttons are metal. And so I have to give this a 10 out of 10 for build quality. Moving right along to the Boling P1, we again have what appears to be all metal design, but it's in a couple different pieces. Although I previously would have said that this was amazingly rugged, but compared to the Sutefoto, I have to take off a point because it's just not that ridiculously solid. So this is a 9 out of 10 now. And then finally, we have the AtomCUBE. Again, it has almost identical build quality to the P1, but it's a little thicker around the edges, although there are more gaps, more parts to come apart. Again, super rigid, super solid. It's a 9 out of 10. Moving right along to light quality, because isn't that what matters? Now, these all have a CRI of 95 to 96. That's pretty solid in their white modes, of course. But they have slightly differing qualities when it comes to the range of white balance, and that's about all that I can differentiate with them on. These three here, the Sutefoto, the Iwata, and the P1, appear to have very, very similar RGB panels. I would even go so far to say as the AtomCUBE and the P1 probably have the same panel inside them. And that's fine. But oddly enough, that doesn't make them the same. And we'll talk about that when we get to the feature set. But these three here, they have identical white balance outputs. They can go from 2500K to 8500K, whereas the Iwata goes from 3000 to 5500, a little bit more limited. And so I gotta give the Iwata a 9 out of 10, and these three a 10 out of 10. They're all great lights, but this one doesn't have quite as much range as the others. Now let's jump onto the feature set, and honestly, that's where we're going to differentiate between these because they're all very similar. They do very similar things. Now I want to compare all these lights based on light output. And it's very interesting. Some of them have better control of their light stability than others, even though they're using the same panels. If I take my camera, set it to f1.8, ISO 100, and then do an auto shutter speed on the high point, taking a picture of this little guy right here, I got about 1/500th of a second shutter speed. So this is approximately the dimmest light of the bunch, but not by a huge margin. Still has a decent amount of power. From level to level, it maintained within a narrow margin of error between 1/400th and 1/640th, the same output level. If we move on to the Boling, we have a little bit more variability. This goes down to 1/250th of a second between blue and green, and generally tops out at 1/640th of a second at red, very bright red. And again, we're 1/500th of a second brightness when we're just in the white spectrum, and it stays consistent through there. Looking at the Sutefoto, it's pretty similar. We've got about 1/500th of a second output, and then in the green, it gets kind of dim, 1/320th of a second. Kind of interesting how they're configured differently like that. But our clear winner for light output is the Pilotfly. Even though this looks a little bit smaller than some of them, and has a smaller battery than some of them, this one outputs red at 1/800th of a second in my measurements, blue at 1/1000th, and the whites around 1/640th. It's not super consistent in color, like between blue and green. In the RGB modes, it'll dip down to 1/400th. But for overall light output, it is the most powerful, but not as consistent as the Iwata when it comes to balancing those LEDs. It's pretty inconsistent. They are fairly close, but I have to give the Pilotfly the win when it comes to light output. On the surface, if we look at the Iwata, we have a very basic light. Not a lot of bells and whistles here. It supposedly has quick charge through USB-C. I didn't notice much of a difference when I tried to do that. You have the smallest battery of the bunch by a fair margin, 2300 milliamp hour, 8.51 watt hour. And so this will last for about 50 minutes. I'm not basing this on the manufacturer specifications, but my own testing. So this lasts about 50 minutes at 100% output. Gets real hot, it wears out. If you're just doing little jobs with this, like I typically do macro photography shots for weddings, the ring pictures and the details, I don't need this to last longer than that, so the slim form factor works fine for me. But if you need a lot of light for a long time, this isn't going to do the job for you. Each of these have lighting scenes, which is kind of new to the field with the RGB lights. The old Iwata didn't have those. And on paper, this has the fewest. It says in the specs that it has 7 scenes. But they're breaking it down in overall scene types, whereas the other lights are breaking down individual variations. So if we count this the same way, this actually has 21 scenes. And honestly, the scenes that are included in this light are better than the ones in all the other lights, regardless of price. So it gains a few points back for that. So that's going to be a 7 out of 10 for feature set. What kind of scenes are we talking about? Well, we have emergency vehicles, flashing lights, we have lightning, we have fireside, we have party scenes and shifting colors, and candlelight. And honestly, this one seems to do the best job of emulating fire or candlelight. Even then, I don't know if it'll be that convincing. Moving on to the Sutefoto. This thing, again, we have lighting scenes, just 10 lighting scenes. They're okay, not amazing, not great. We have a 3300 milliamp hour, 24.4 watt hour battery that'll last for about 145 minutes at 100% output. That's pretty solid. And we've got, of course, the 1/4-20 mount, which pretty much all of these do, and very hard to remove because everything's all metal. Cold shoe mount on the bottom of this. So that's unique to this one, and there is a little lanyard loop on it as well. That's something that can set this one apart. Overall, nothing amazing, nothing spectacular. It's not really missing anything that it needs. Again, this one's a 7 out of 10. Has a couple more bells and whistles, but the scenes aren't quite as nice as the ones in the Iwata. Moving right along to the Boling again. I feel like in many ways set the standard for what these other lights needed to contain, and it still competes pretty well, and I'll tell you why. The scenes, it doesn't have the most scenes or the best scenes. So even though this has a smaller battery on paper, 2930 milliamp hours, 21.7 watt hours, I found that it lasted 148 minutes. So this was #1 in overall runtime, even with the smaller battery. I don't know why. It has about the same light output as the Sutefoto, but we'll talk about that in a minute. What this one really wins out on, and I'm surprised that no one has completely copied this yet, is this articulating arm. This makes this so much easier to use. Even just for something as simple as setting it like this, or you can just attach it to a light stand. You can do whatever you want. It's got quarter 20 mounts all over this thing. It is so versatile because of that, and it slides back in just like that. Fantastic. I've been using this for a long time, and even though it comes with an Allen key to retension this, I haven't needed to use it. It still has just the right amount of tension. I'm gonna give this a 9 out of 10 for features. And then we'll move on to the AtomCUBE again. This one here also features USB-C quick charge, which, again, I didn't notice a big difference in the amount of charge time. And this is the only one with Bluetooth control. So if you pop open your phone, this easily connects once you've downloaded their app. Super simple, and it can control everything that you do with this light. You have scene controls, which you can control through the screen on this or through your phone. Honestly, it's much easier in the phone. But also, honestly, I don't see myself using it through the phone in most situations that I use these lights. It's just an extra step. So you have 13 scenes. They're not the best scenes. They're almost as good as the ones in the Iwata, but not quite. It comes with this articulating arm, but it's not as good as the one on the P1, not quite. Lots of mounting holes on the end of this thing. You have 2 holes for lanyards. You have a 2300 milliamp hour battery, 29.6 watt hours, which gets you 130 minutes, which is kind of in second if we call the P1 and the Sutefoto tied for first. So it's pretty solid. It has the most advanced features, but its scene controls aren't quite as good as the Iwata, so it's a 9 out of 10 as well. Moving right along to usability. And to me, that's actually more important than light quality. How easy it is to use these when you pull them out of your bag and try to get to work. Starting back with the Iwata, this one is not the easiest to use. You only have the power button, the mode button, and a plus and minus button. Changing the modes and the light output with the same buttons and not having a wheel that you can quickly slide and not having a slider that you can quickly turn the device off and on with, that makes this a little harder, a little slower to use. A little bit more finicky. The RGB control is in 360-degree increments. That's nice, and we'll find out soon why that's nice when we talk about the next one. So overall usability, it's not great, a little bit lacking on input. It's a 6 out of 10. Moving on to the Sutefoto. Once again, we have just 4 buttons. Power, and if you hold it for mode, set, plus and minus buttons. So again, this takes you a while to get around and make changes. It seems kind of unnecessary to limit it that way, but it also probably adds to the ruggedness of this. There's not a lot to catch or break on this device. But then when we go down to the RGB control, it's in 1530 steps. That's kind of ridiculous. It's way too many steps. There is no circumstance that I can think of that you would need that many steps. And because there's no wheel to rapidly change it, you can press and hold the buttons, but then you skip over the places that you want to be. It makes it harder to use than it needs to be. And so, for usability, the Sutefoto comes down at the bottom at 5 out of 10. Next up again, the P1. You have a dedicated dimmer wheel. You have a function button that also slides up and down for rapid changes. You have a power switch that quickly slides the device off and on without having to hold it. And a dedicated set button. That makes it much easier to use. And let's not forget this articulating arm, super easy to use. RGB is controlled in 360-degree increments. That's perfect. That's a 9 out of 10. But why is it only 9? Well, let me tell you, obviously we have the Pilotfly coming up here. This thing here, once again we have a slider power switch, dedicated set button, wheel for brightness, wheel and button for function. So that's fantastic. But you add in the Bluetooth controllability, 360-degree RGB control, that's a 10 out of 10. Nothing can beat this for usability. You can use it however you want, as easy as you want. Boom. Alright, next up we've got to talk about value. The Iwata GL-03 comes in at $110. Although I love this little light, that's not a great price. You have very little battery life, the usability is kind of poor. Honestly, it's a bit outclassed. Why is it outclassed? Well, I'm gonna throw a 5 out of 10 for this for value before I tell you. But next up is the Sutefoto. It's just a little bit bigger, but boy is it rugged. Has a few more features. Has a bigger battery, much longer lasting. And it's the same price. Being that it's tied for the cheapest of all of these, I've got to get this a 9 out of 10. It's just a better light for your money. It might not be as pretty, might not be as svelte and as pocketable, but it's a fantastic light, and it just beats it for value. Next up, we've got the Boling P1, and this one's clocking in more expensive at $150. But it gives you more features for that money. It's not as great a value as a Sutefoto. It's an extra 40 bucks for, generally speaking, the same kind of light, the same battery life. So that's a 7 out of 10 for value. And then finally, we've got the AtomCUBE again. This one is by far the most expensive at $170. Like in day-to-day usage, the Bluetooth and the other functions, sure, they're great. It'll even do mesh Bluetooth from device to device, which is fantastic. Honestly, this one is shooting way above these other three. But if I have to compare it to these three, it's only a 6 out of 10 for value. If you just need to make some light, you can spend just over half as much and do that with the Sutefoto or the Iwata. When you get nice things, you have to pay more for them. That's just the way it is. So let's go over our totals. The Iwata got a total score of 34 out of 50. The Sutefoto actually surprised me, got a 41 out of 50. The Boling P1, solid 44 out of 50. It's a good light. And then when we get down to the Pilotfly, we've got a 44 out of 50. There's a light for what you want for your needs. Which one's my favorite? Ugh, that's a tough one. And honestly, after this, I was thinking, I don't need this many RGB lights. What can you do with this many RGB lights? Well, let me tell you. You can set them up to produce edge lighting and point lighting in a photo if you're taking a larger picture. Like this picture of Monica, who you can find on Instagram, Miss M Cosplays. We wanted to have some fun and create a composite image. And so we put some green lights around her and then cut her out of the backdrop and did these awesome pictures. So yeah, you can do a lot with this many little lights. Now, could I have done the same thing with, say, a green gelled flash in a softbox with a grid? Maybe, but there'd be more light spill and it would be less specific. I wanted the light on her hair, on her hands, and not spilling too much further beyond that because that can really mess with your balance. So yeah, there is use in having multiples of these. And when it comes to that, the AtomCUBE really excels because you can mesh them together and control them all with your phone very easily. When you're just doing one at a time, using the Bluetooth app doesn't really scale usability. When you're using multiples and walking around to each one and pressing these fiddly little buttons, yeah, it's not quite as practical anymore. Okay, which one's my favorite one? Well, obviously the Pilotfly. It's got the most light output, it's got the most features, that's fantastic. But also the P1. This arm. I just can't get over how useful this arm is. It makes my life so easy. So, although I loved the form factor of this little guy, when it comes to the battery life and just the general usability of this, unfortunately, it's gonna have to stay in my bag for now. These two are winning out. So, let me know what you think. If you think there's a better light, a better option, you think my scores are wrong, let me know what you do with these RGB panels. I know they're designed for video, and heck, I do video, and I use these in the openings of my videos, the cinematic moments. And they're fantastic for that. But I also use them for photography and everything in between. They're great to be used for that sort of thing. I've got links in the description to all these things. Some of these links are affiliate links, some of them aren't. If you get something, you can help support this channel and help feed my family. Next up, we're going to be doing a little bit more flash testing, and we're going to be looking at the Viltrox 85mm 1.8, which I'm filming with right now. The continuous video autofocus is solid. Spoiler alert. But until next time, go take some colorful photos.